Hello, everyone. It's nice to see many people standing up after yesterday. It's always an honor to have you here as well. And we will be taking over what has been discussed in the last panel. The last panel has already introduced us into some interests of the private sector to invest in Mexico that are related to the environment. Now, one of the main concerns that our clients have are when they go to Mexico and they buy some piece of land, is to see if that plot of land that they bought will be able to develop an industrial project or not. And in the last years, we had a lot of problems with that due to many constraints that we'll be speaking about. And of course, they are a little bit of a risk that should be considered by investors in Mexico when investing in a project to be developed in Mexico. In the panel, I am accompanied by Miriam Palacios and by Adrián Gómez. Both of them have a lot of experience in projects in Mexico and facing all the environmental problems in order to start a new project. Miriam Palacios, she is a real estate attorney with over 20 years of experience. She studied her JD at the University of Las Americas in Puebla and her LLM at the International Law at the Tec Monterrey. She is the managing counsel at Corporate Properties of the Americas and has vast experience in the development of industrial facilities. Adrián Gómez is an environmental health and safety professional with 17 years of consulting experience and is currently the Director of Operations of Ramboll, Mexico. Adrián has completed projects in over 30 countries, including many related to the energy sector. Adrián is a founder steering committee member from Chapter Zero Mexico, the climate governance initiative from the WEF. He's an associate professor in Monterrey Tech in environmental matters and an instructor in EGADE Business School for climate governance. So now, basically, it was very interesting for me to bring to this panel not only environmental lawyers that may be very technical many times, and of course, and we have already had a panel of how to milk asteroids, which will be much more technical than this. But we will be having the experience from a real estate lawyer and also from a non-lawyer who has, of course, experience of how to technically solve many of these issues. So my first question here, Miriam and Adrián, would be, with expected incoming investment in Mexico, what would be the main concerns from an environmental perspective? Of course, we know that the most developed part in Mexico regarding the industry would be the north and part of El Bajío, more in central Mexico, which have faced severe droughts. So what do you think that would be the main concerns in this regard from an environmental point of view?
Yes, well, yeah, as it was previously mentioned, with more industry coming to Mexico and mainly to the northern part, more resources will be required, and among these resources is, as you mentioned, water, and we will also have a great impact on the environment, on the emissions, on the air quality that we have right now in our cities, and as well as the footprint. We will be eliminating more and more of the natural absorption land and changing that for more losing absorption areas, absorption sections. So everything, so the development has to be done in a very sustainable manner. The main problem that we will be facing is how to make this sustainable development a reality in our cities, so that we don't take a real toll on the environment and on the health of the inhabitants, because this is something that we are already facing, as you mentioned, in cities like Monterrey with a drought, which is very severe for the second year in a row. And we are seeing that more and more in other cities, like in the center of Mexico, and also, and the water is a big issue. It's a big challenge for every developer to ideally find a place where water is available.
What about you, Adrián?
Yeah, I think the topics that were mentioned, I will agree with air pollution and with water, but I like to highlight, and this was part of the jokes yesterday in the roundtables and today, when one of you saw me, they say, I'm glad you were able to take a shower. I was making a joke yesterday that I live in Monterrey and water is a problem. When we speak about water, it's a huge challenge, but it's very severely misunderstood in the sense that everyone, just you go to the bathroom, you open the water faucet, and you get the water. The reality is that in Monterrey, that stopped happening, and that makes no sense for a city of 6 million people and being the second largest city and more industrial city in Mexico. So the water part is not only how much water is going to be available, but it's also how I'm going to be using that water. So the challenge becomes not only on the scarcity of the resource, but also on the technology that I need to apply in order to start saving water so I can actually use it. We have a lot of clients that give us a call and say, Adrián, we want to help the city of Monterrey with water. What can we do? And the answer was, unless you have a direct line with God and you can make it rain, there is very little things you can actually do. A lot of companies think of themselves like, oh, we're going to do a zero discharge. Well, that's amazing. But if there is no water to get in, you still have no water. You cannot operate. So that's the water part, a little further information from what was previously mentioned. Now, the air pollution is going to be also a constraint. And we're going to start seeing this type of constraints in different areas. Mexico, as we mentioned, there are two Mexicos, the north and the south, and they are very different for either geographic, social, or economic issues. The air pollution is very well known for Mexico City, but it's also being a huge concern now in Monterrey. And we also have the parts of Toluca and Guadalajara that are facing significant air contamination issues. And the challenges that are going to be facing for new industries is going to be, am I going to be able to operate when there is an air contingency, the equivalent of the non-attainment areas in USA? Like, well, I put tons of millions of dollars up there, and 4 months in a row, I've been required to shut down my facility once a month. That's a huge concern on the economic perspective. And a third challenges that I also see, which is associated to the drought, and it's also part of an environmental perspective, I will say, is fires. We have all seen what happened in Canada with the fires, the fires in Australia. That's well known. We don't really see that in Mexico. But we were recently doing a site sustainable assessment for a data center. And I was speaking with some of the engineers, and I asked him, why are we saying there is going to be a fire? These guys are in Querétaro. Querétaro has no forest. And the climate change projections indicate that pastures and agricultural land are going to be in a risk of fire within the next 5 to 10 years in Mexico. And where are we putting all the new industrial developments? In areas that used to be agricultural land. So you may have a very nice industrial park, and then adjacent to you may be crops that can generate the fire that is going to be a concern to your facility. So those three, I will say, are the main concerns we're going to be seeing. And the difference is going to be where you're located. If you are located in Bajío, you probably will have more water issues than air. If you are in Monterrey, you will have all of the issues together. So that's going to be changing on where the investment is going to go.
So moving back a little bit to the water issues, we have seen also a big problem. Here in Mexico, of course, water is a public asset. In order to exploit water, you need a concession from the government. And a big problem here is that the law of national waters establishes that there's a kind of preferential rights, of course, for domestic use before industry. And that in the last years has been a big problem for CONAGUA, which is the National Water Commission, to issue concessions in favor of industry, especially in this water where there have been severe droughts in the last year. So that's a real big issue. What do you think that could be the solutions for this in order for new companies to be able to acquire water rights?
Yes, well, yeah, water is a big issue, along with energy, as was mentioned on the prior panel. If a land, if a property has no water, then it's not feasible to be developed. Right now, the industrial developments are mostly far away from the municipal organisms which are in charge of the municipal water. So you rely on these water concession titles, and they are not as available as we would like to. So there is an increased value on the water rights right now. These are going to increase.
Also, there's a problem with that saying, because of course municipalities are allowed to have water, they have a preferential right, but they don't care about keeping the water. Many times municipalities do not have a wastewater treatment plant, actually are the main polluters, even if Profepa usually sees the industry as the main contingency. They will be the first ones to inspect the industries. Most of the time the problems of pollution of water come actually from the municipal water system.
Yes, and also there's also a lack of administration from the water, so lack of maintenance, which results into a great problem of leaks that also diminish the amount of water that is available for the community. So a lot of the water is lost in leaks through these municipal systems, and also it's not sufficient to provide for the industry. So a very thorough due diligence has to be made every time you are looking for a site to develop or enter into a contract for a new industry, as water-wise. So it's very important to identify if that property has if the property of the land has the water concession title, and if the water concession title is also up to date. It has to be in compliance with the law and with the own terms and conditions that are contained in the water concession title, so that these are not null or these are not expired. And there is a national registry of water rights that can be easily accessed to by internet, by the CONAGUA site, where it's easily to confirm if a water concession title is still valid, is still current. So there are, through a due diligence, you can be able to identify if it is it's possible to make an investment in a certain area, in a certain lot, and have the water that you need for your project. So that would be the only way right now to figure that out.
What about you, Adrián?
Following on the due diligence part, the due diligence needs not only to be legal, in the sense that you may have the permit, you may have everything should be in order, and the permit may be transferred, but the permit actually indicates that if there is no water,
that's correct.
Right.
There is nothing else to do. So what we are doing with a couple of clients is what we call the site sustainable selection. And in that part, we identify from a technical perspective how much water is in the aquifer, how much water is being withdrawn from the aquifer, assuming there is water. What are the types of water uses that are available, and how those have been changed in the last couple of years? Are we seeing, for example, in areas like Puebla, where the city is growing, how much water is going to public? Because you cannot, as industry, you cannot really buy that water. That water is going to be always first goes to them. Which areas have large agricultural water reserves, and which ones we can actually switch? And something that needs to be done also in those respects is to be reasonable. And I'll further explain. Every time a client comes to me, they say, Adrián, we want to put a facility and we want 4 million cubic meters of water. I'm like, what? Why? Like, well, we want that much water. Why? And you keep asking why, and the reason is they go to the production department and they say, Pedro, how much water do you need? Like, oh, for the facility in Mexico, we need 10,000 liters. Oh, amazing. Are you sure? Well, 15. Okay. And then it goes going up to the C-suite, to the board, whatever, and those 15, when they ask him, it's like, oh, we need 15. It's like, oh, are you sure? Well, let's put 30. And every time an industrial project comes, they have a water balance that is just irrational, because they are asking a Santa Claus letter, and they are not really taking into consideration what the project needs. And that has very significant effects when they ask us, how can we secure water? It's a very different discussion to start trying to, I don't know, to get 250 cubic meters per year versus 4 million. And into that discussion, we need to start thinking that water is a resource. We are very used to look at water as a free, like air. The air is there, it's not going to go anywhere. Well, the water is not necessarily there, and we're facing the consequences of that. In such regards, we need to also start thinking on not only how to get the water, but how to save the water that we already have. Can we do zero discharge? Can we do water audits? Can we do, for example, there is not a lot of regulation or stormwater. If you are located in an area where there is a significant precipitation, you can actually start recycling that water. But when you start having the discussions with industry, they always say, I want 4 million cubic meters, and they don't have an answer as to what. So in the due diligence process, we need to make sure that not only the legal, but also the hydrological parts of the assessments are considered. We have, yes.
And that part is quite important that you mentioned, Adrián. Many times we know that CONAGUA will not grant a concession because they say there's no available water at a specific aquifer. And many times what we have done is conduct our own technical study for that aquifer, and we find out that actually there is available water. Now it's not the case in Monterrey, but some time ago when we needed with a client some vast volumes of water, and of course it was a zona de vera, it was a restricted area with no possibility of granting a new concession. What we did is perform our own study in order to show the authority, hey, actually the aquifer right now has water, so grant me a concession. So what I recommend that is really important because CONAGUA does not have the resources many times to fulfill its obligations to check if there's available water or not, to see if an aquifer is polluted or not, which are required by law, but they do not comply with it.
And the fun part on that is the water availability status is based on CONAGUA NOM 011. If you read that, they never take into consideration illegal water use. So you may find the other way around. You may find that in the paper it says there is water, but in practice there is not.
That's
so
correct.
They are going to tell you, yeah, you can get a permit whenever you need it, and then you drill the hole and you find yourself in an area where there is no water, and you already have top of millions of dollars above ground for that.
What would be both of your experiences in recycling water and obtaining water from the municipality?
I will say it depends where you are. In areas like Monterrey, where the majority of the water and agua y drenaje is a very strong, so to say, authority, you may find that there is an ability to have an interest chat with them in order how to use industrial water or recycled water. That also happens in the states like Querétaro. Querétaro, they also have good infrastructure for that. But in a lot of the areas, as Miriam mentioned, the industry may be located where there is no sewer system available. So for them, it may be very expensive to put all the infrastructure, and a lot of the times they are not willing to take that extra credit of let's recycle water, because I already have a lot of problems trying to deal just with the POTW, the public covenant treatment system. So the political part on where you are located and which is the party and how strong are the institution plays a significant role on how to answer that question.
Yeah, as you comment, I mean, right now the government wants to move investment not in the north of Mexico, but in the south. But the big problem we have with that, of course, is there's no infrastructure currently to make it an ideal project for nearshoring. However, now we know that the railway system is trying to be improved right now. We have some important projects also connecting the railway system with ports so that the south could be a more open option for new industries and connect that with the US or other countries. And there's water there.
There is water. The fun part, for example, is a new large investment announced, Heineken in Yucatan. And when you start dealing with that, Yucatan takes all its water from groundwater wells. And the whole city doesn't have a sewer system because the type of rock, it's prohibited, it's too expensive to do that. So there may be water, there may be better connection or infrastructure, but there may be other technical aspects that can prohibit the installation of water recycling facilities or wastewater treatment systems. So we need to just have that into consideration.
Perfect. Moving now from water, and let's be very brief about this because it has been touched in the other panel. There are many companies that, of course, when they come to Mexico, they have net zero policies. They have global net zero policies. And one major concern, of course, is availability of clean energies. What would be your experience in this regard?
So for the scope 1 emissions, the challenge that everybody faces is financing. So if I am a facility that is going to be putting new infrastructure for that, it's going to be really hard for me to get a green bond or an ESG bond or something, because the Mexican taxonomy is just targeted to certain industries, and the manufacturing or the energy sector is not really necessarily included into that. Now, when we go, and by the way, scope 1 is the emissions that I generate in my facility, scope 2 are the emissions that are generated by my electricity provider, and scope 3 is my upstream and downstream supply chain. So for the scope 2, the challenge is the government. Let's remember Iberdrola plant was closed in Monterrey because some CRE issues, and they were providing cleaner energy than the regular CFE. So a lot of the times you are required, as was mentioned in the previous panel or two previous ago, there is no energy and there is no clean energy and there is no way to get it. So I am a automotive OEM that wants to comply with my corporate goals about climate change, and I cannot get money for new projects in my facility. I cannot get clean energy. And when we go to the scope 3, I will say the main challenge is the corporate culture in Mexico. We at the World Economic Forum are trying to get Mexico to net zero with climate, with chapter 0. And when we start speaking with the boards, there is a very clear misunderstanding of what is scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, what climate governance is, what ESG means. So in my experience, everyone that wants to do a net zero faces challenges in the 3 scopes. You may have a great climate governance coming from Germany or from here for US, but when you start dealing with your local suppliers, they are totally clueless what you are actually asking them. And it's very hard to engage in conversations and commitments with your supply chain when that happens.
Miriam, this has been touched also a little bit in the last panel, but we know that another big problem now for nearshoring is that environmental authorities start taking a long time to issue permits. And many times, pursuant to the current policy of the current administration, they're actually not issuing the same. What has been your experience in this regard?
Yes, that's a reality. This happens in all levels and in all sectors. And regarding environmental permits specifically, we have to deal with permits at the 3 levels, at the federal, state, and municipal level, which makes it complex because you have to make a good strategy and also be very transparent with the final user, with our clients, towards what timing will be. But yes, this is an area of opportunity that we have right now because the projects get delayed. Unfortunately, the projects take longer than they used to in the past. Each time the permitting process gets more complicated, there are more requirements asked from the authorities, and there are more conditions imposed in connection to the authorizations. So you have to get a very well organized team to thoroughly follow up the conditions that are imposed through the permits and also gather the evidence, present it to the authority, and then get your completion certificate that will complement your permits. Because without that, the permit wouldn't be complete. So it's a long process, and unfortunately it delays the projects or the start of the projects. And that's something that we have to work in, very closely with our clients and also with the authorities to sensibilize them and also to strategize so that we can move at the same time with the permits on the 3 levels. So that's what I've seen in my area.
Here I would just like to add that something I differ quite a bit with Hector from the last panel is that they consider that the regulatory framework is already there in existence, but it's not really. There are lots, for example, for indigenous consultation that was asked, some gentlemen asked in the last panel. There's still a lot to be made. So whenever you start an industry in an area that has some indigenous presence, which has been widely controversial because there's no definition of what really is an indigenous group, there's no real definition for that. That's currently delaying projects, and currently actually the indigenous consultation is kind of regulated for energy projects a bit, but there's still a lot to be done. Of course, that's more of a present, that's a little bit more of a problem if we consider to move this nearshoring to areas more in the south of Mexico. One question now, regarding land use, it's also a big problem. Many times I have clients that say, hey, I already bought a plot of land and I want to build a chemical industry. And they face a problem that that area is not apt for that. What has been your experience in this regard?
Yeah, so that's also one of the main aspects that we have to analyze and audit before entering into a new project, the land use. We can find a very attractive land location-wise and also size-wise, but if the land use is not the specific land use approved for industry, in my case, then it's a no-go for us. We would not invest in that because the change, making a change of the land use in Mexico takes a lot of time. So if you're looking for to develop a land in the short period of time, it's not going to be feasible to work with a land that does not have the appropriate land use. So that would be better for someone that's working, that wants to build a land bank and develop in the future, probably 10 years from now. But if you need to really develop and start working, well, it's not going to.
Also here, that's also a little bit of a problem I would like to comment because we do not have a real definition of what is a high-risk activity as such. There are two lists of SEMARNAT that were issued in the 90s that are no longer in force for over 20 years. SEMARNAT continues using them, but that's legally they're no longer binding. So that's a big problem, which we have a huge legal loophole, which should be covered.
And in that part, not only the highly hazardous activities, the first and the second listing, we find that the definition of industry itself is not widespread accepted. Every state has a different industry.
That's correct.
And you may have the same facility doing the same process in a different state, and you may be classified as industria pesada, or industria media, or industria ligera, or industria contaminante, and every state has its specifics, which are not environmental, by the way. Some of those fall within the economic law, and when you start trying to tie this economic law with the environmental part, with what the cabildo says in the municipality, there is a big mismatch. So we have found, for example, industrial parks that half of the park was heavy industry and half of the park was not. But one of the properties, for whatever strange reason, there was an industrial building that was like a cross section. The top left part was heavy industry, but the bottom right was not. So it's like, well, what if I move my machine from here to there? Like, am I now out of compliance? That makes absolutely no sense. So those challenges and the fact that if you want to change the land use take a lot of time, in addition to the fact that some state governments have indicated when you develop an industrial plant or an industrial park, you need to do an environmental impact assessment, which is something Americans are not that used to because it's not a requirement here. It's kind of the NEPA for you guys, but for every private project. And when the state approves an industrial park, they may say, we prohibit the establishment of highly hazardous activities. And that really limits not only chemical industry, food industry. I have a big freezer that uses ammonia. That's going to be a highly hazardous activities according to the first and second listings. And you may be packing guacamole, but you have a big storage cooling facility that will classify as highly hazardous. And we may find a couple of industrial parks where the state resolutions of environmental impact have prevented the installation of several types of industry.
And even with gas pipelines, also for the energy sector, that's quite important. That's a big gap in the regulation that, of course, in that I also disagree with the former panel in the sense that there's a lot to be done also in the regulatory work. Now going back to waste, of course, many companies also have as a global policy to have the implementation of circular economy. However, again, here we're quite lacking in regulation. What would be your experience in this regard, and have you seen any state that is more advanced than others?
I will say something that may not be very popular among lawyers, and I guess I'm probably the only non-lawyer here, but we should not have a law for circular economy, if you ask me. Circular economy has 3 pillars. One of those is waste. And what I have seen, for example, the city of Mexico invited me to the panel in the local Congress to lead why Mexico City should have a law. And when they told them, you shouldn't have a law, they were like, but we invite you. It's like, yeah, and I'm telling you the truth. We already have state laws for waste. We already have the federal law for waste. And based on that, the waste part, I will say, is properly designed from a regulatory perspective. Now, we need to have incentives, for example, on design for disassembly. We need to have incentives for taking care of the other pillars of circular economy, which not necessarily are environmental. And I think that as a government, there should be public policy that aims to foster circular economy, but not really to put a law on circular economy.
Perfect. And finally, also a big issue regarding new companies wanting to be established in Mexico, new industries, is having access to green finance. What has been your experience in this regard, Miriam?
Well, it depends on the sector. For real estate developers, it's not still yet that attractive. We still haven't found that the burden that would come in connection to or in comparison to the interest rates would be attractive enough for us to enter into a green financing project. So, it makes more sense economic-wise to just get regular financing for our projects than invest in a unfortunately right now in a green project. So that's what I've seen.
Perfect. What about you, Adrián?
The green or the sustainable tag finance, with the Mexican taxonomy, I think the real estate is one of the sectors that is going to be more productive because now we have rules for how the buildings need to be. The difference is around 10 base points between financing. So as you mentioned, not necessarily an amazing finance discount or savings for that. But for the rest of the industry, if you're a chemical industry or you're a food industry and you want to put something that goes towards water savings or towards energy, we end up copying, because in Mexico we don't have the taxonomy, either the CBI, the Clean Bond Initiative, or the European taxonomy. And the issue with that is the bank or the lender says something, and then everybody starts looking to what are the rules that we need to play in order to secure the finance. And that elevates the cost a lot because you need a lot of legal consulting, a lot of technical consulting while doing that, and it's not necessarily the most savvy use of the time for everyone. So accessing to green finance in certain sectors will be, I believe, hugely increased with the taxonomy, but 85% of the economy may not be yet included into that, and that's going to be a challenge.
Perfect. So I think that would be all. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we have some time for some questions, Charlie.
Sure.
Would anyone want to make a question about this? So otherwise, I think we're done. Let's do the first panel.